Silicon Valley and Hollywood is where many dream of their American dream. This is also the main destination for Chinese immigrants, but the American dream of these latter Chinese immigrants seems to be very different from other immigrants. Of the 10 most Chinese cities in the United States, 5 are in California, which is also the place with the largest number of Chinese people. The ever-increasing number of Chinese immigrants and their descendants have already affected the demographic there. Let's take a look at these numbers. In 2018, California's Chinese population was over 1.1 million, or 36.9% of the country's total Chinese population. California's percentage of the Chinese population is 4.5%, which is 3 times higher than the 1.3% of the nation's Chinese population. Chinese immigrants from mainland China make up to 60% of the Chinese population and have the highest fertility rate in the state, far exceeding other Asian groups. In fact, this high fertility rate began more than a decade ago, and strangely enough, many of these families are single mothers. In 2014, multiple media outlets reported that the otherwise ordinary American villages of Rowland Heights and Arcadia in Southern California are now home to many more pregnant women from China, many of whom, according to the Chinese media, are the wives and mistresses of Chinese officials who give birth in the US so that their children can be granted US citizenship, which opens up a way to help parents immigrate to the US as well.
There's like some streets most of the houses are rented out for people that have girlfriends, girlfriends with an ass.
Since the arrival of the mainland Chinese, there have been a large number of luxury homes and cars purchased, and the postnatal care industry has been well developed. The freehold of land in the US has become extremely attractive to Chinese people. In 2013 alone, the Chinese bought $28.6 billion in real estate in the US, mostly in California and New York State. While the Chinese Communist Party continues to promote hatred of the US and opposition to the so-called US imperialism, they are moving their families and assets to the United States. They are named naked officials by Chinese people. In 2004, China's Ministry of Commerce counted more than 4,000 naked officials who had fled the country, and in 2009, the Voice of America reported that according to a survey by the Chinese Communist Party Central Committee, 1.08 million family members and children of senior CCP officials had immigrated overseas, mostly through investment immigration. They live extravagantly, using cash to buy houses, luxury homes, and sports cars. All of this corresponds to what's happening in California. If these people immigrate simply to pursue freedom, it won't hurt the US and American people very much, but they are in fact realizing their Chinese dream in the US. The Chinese netizens have a recent saying, "Staying in the US is a way of life, opposing the US is a job." This phrase refers to these people.
我爱共产党，怎么了？我爱共产党，是时候该站好队了，该站到共产党这边，会好好对待你的。我是留学生，你上共产党队是吧？对啊，我跟共产党站一队，怎么了？你是共产主义是不是？我就是共产主义，怎么了？
Due to the language barrier of the local media, the Chinese media's rhetoric and propaganda have also penetrated into the early immigrant Chinese community through the introduction of WeChat, changing the mindset of the local American Chinese. A May 2020 study by the Citizen Lab found that there are an estimated 100 to 200 million WeChat users overseas, while the average daily number of active users in the US is 19 million. WeChat, filled with censorship and politically conscious propaganda from China, has become the primary source of news and information for overseas Chinese, and it is worrisome that both first-generation immigrants and the new generation of ethnic Chinese rely heavily on WeChat. WeChat is the most important source of news and information for overseas Chinese. Many people think that this group is still too small to have a significant impact on the US. However, the increasing number of incidents related to the Chinese Communist Party in recent years, including the theft of technology, the recruitment of spies overseas, and the development of proxy groups, reflect the seriousness of the problem. California is a major US innovation base, has long been a world leader in its high-tech industry, and is an important agricultural state. But California is experiencing negative population growth for the first time in its history in 2020, and many people are fleeing the state, which is inextricably linked to its policies. The 2018 US Census Bureau estimates that only 36.6% of California's population is currently non-Hispanic white, with the rest being Hispanic, Asian, and other races, a very different percentage than the rest of the country, and a reason why California government policies are skewed toward non-white races. The Chinese are not only a large population in California, but they also have a lot of resources and are a group the Democratic government is trying to win over. For example, when Kamala Harris, the Democratic candidate for vice president, ran for San Francisco District Attorney in 2003, she was given the Chinese name He Jianli by the Chinese. Since then, Kamala Harris often introduced herself to Chinese voting public with the Chinese name and has received support from many Chinese organizations. In North America, one of the most influential Chinese organizations is the Chinese Progressive Association, CPA. Mike Gonzalez, a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation, wrote in an investigative report that CPA is a partner of the Chinese Communist Party in the US, helping it to promote and advance its agenda in the US. It's got a history of flying the Chinese flag at Boston City Hall, commemorating the so-called National Day of the Chinese Communist takeover of China. The work of the Chinese Progressive Association in the US is often praised by the official Communist Party mouthpiece, the China Daily. The report also points out that the donation page for the Black Futures Lab, founded by BLM founder Alicia Garza, clearly states that they are projects financially supported by the Chinese Progressive Association. Back in California, the state has a leftist policy of high taxes, high welfare, and promotes the race-based distribution of social resources. In June 2020, the California legislature intends to lift the 24-year ban on affirmative action, and once the California Assembly Constitutional Amendment No. 5, ACA 5, is passed, race and ethnicity are allowed to become factors in admissions, hiring, and contracts. In fact, if California state universities could adopt racial quotas in its admissions process, it would be a disincentive to Chinese and Indian American students who have the highest percentage of students in the university and have a high admissions rate. The amendment received strong opposition from Asian Americans. Moreover, the California Constitution explicitly states that the state shall not discriminate against or give preferential treatment to any individual or group of individuals on the basis of race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin in public employment, public education, or public contracting, which the ACA 5 seems to have repealed the Constitution. The bill was ultimately defeated in the ballot proposition on November 3rd. In fact, this practice of distributing social resources according to race and ethnicity has always been prevalent in Communist China, which has more than 50 ethnic minorities. Since the resumption of the college entrance exams in 1978, the Communist Party has offered special preferential policies such as priority admissions or extra points to children of outstanding Communist Party members, ethnic minorities, returned immigrants, and overseas Chinese. An anonymous member of the official Chinese media has written an article pointing out that the policy of giving extra points to ethnic minorities is apparently a preferential treatment, but inside it is equivalent to the adulteration of the ethnicity, which can induce ethnic people to take the initiative to receive Chinese education and promote the so-called Sinicization, but in fact, it is to make them abandon their original culture and values while accepting the philosophy of the Communist Party. These cases in California reflect the dichotomy between the Chinese groups that represent the Communist Party's proxies and ordinary Chinese Americans. The former use their influence to make use of US resources and interfere in US politics for their own benefit, while the latter becomes the victims of the former, often without realizing it. Many Chinese analysts have also pointed out that the Chinese Communist Party's actions in the US are designed to protect the interests of a small number of communist members who do not represent the Chinese people or the Chinese Americans. But what should be even more alarming to Americans is that the Chinaization of California is spreading throughout the US, especially in coastal cities. Looking at the map of voting results in the 2020 US election, the people in most areas of the US actually chose President Trump, who represents traditional American values and is seeking re-election. However, the coastal cities controlled by the Democratic Party, with large populations and electoral votes, and a high concentration of resources and political influence, is also the place where the Chinese Communist Party has mainly concentrated its efforts on infiltration and Chinaization, or let's say, Chinese communization. It's a fact for Americans to be wary of.
They've invested a lot of money in the Biden family. China's not so stupid as to think that money went to Hunter Biden. They know that was to bribe Dad to get him on their side.
Let me be clear.
There's an evil spirit in Chinese legend known for its monumental and insatiable greed. Tao Ti was so greedy it consumed everything in sight, even its own body. Without body, Tao Ti has no allegiance. Without allegiance, Tao Ti has no honor. Without honor, the spirit of greed could be made to do anything. It wanted more at any cost. The Chinese Communist Party has used and abused the greed of others to get exactly what they wanted for decades. This brings us to Joe Biden and his allegiance to the Chinese Communist Party. New York Times bestselling author Peter Schweizer tells One American News, the Biden-China relationship should have set off major alarm bells from the start.
I think the Biden-China relationship is deeply troubling and demands investigation because you're talking about the Biden family while Joe Biden was Vice President of the United States engaging in a series of lucrative deals with the Chinese government. Not with Chinese companies, not with American companies in China, but with the Chinese government. And these deals happened precisely at the time that Joe Biden was the point person on policy towards China.
Legendary mob buster and New York mayor and attorney Rudy Giuliani has taken down a good number of mob families in his day. But the Biden family, says Giuliani, crosses every acceptable boundary imaginable.
The egregious conduct, which gets close to treason, is in China. You should understand it's not just one transaction. There are many transactions in China. Hunter Biden was doing a lot of business with China while his father was negotiating for the United States on very, very sensitive issues of national security. I mean, they got a good deal. They paid and they got what they wanted. And Joe sold out the United States.
No surprise. In his nearly 50 years as a politician, Biden seems to have always had a special place for the Chinese communist regime.
He can't get tough on China. They'll sue him. They'll want their money back. They've invested a lot of money in the Biden family. China's not so stupid as to think that money went to Hunter Biden. They know that was to bribe Dad to get him on their side.
Let me be clear. I believed in 1979 and said so, and I believe now that a rising China is a positive development, not only for the people of China, but for the United States and the world as a whole.
China has imposed the most intrusive system of surveillance the world has ever seen and has detained 1 million people for forced indoctrination.
Can I ask you why people are kneeling, blindfolded and shaven and being led to trains in modern China? What is going on there?
I do not know where you'll get this videotape. 50 years from now, our great-grandchildren will look back and say, what a beautiful history we wrote together.
A team of Chinese spies was stealing American inventions and costing a lot of American jobs. The Chinese seem to feel, why build it if you can just steal it?
China is going to eat our lunch? Come on, man.
In an op-ed a mere 2 seasons before America would go to the polls and vote for their president, Joe Biden penned an editorial published by Foreign Affairs and commits a complete about-face on China. The United States does need to get tough with China, waxes Biden. If China has its way, it will keep robbing the United States and American companies of their technology and intellectual property. Biden seems to say that under Obama and his administration, America's foreign policy was somehow stronger against China. The facts defy Biden's new memory.
He took a very soft posture towards China, continues to today. He does not view them as a threat. He does not view them as a rival. He thinks their economic rise is good for the United States. That puts him in a unique position compared to just about anybody else on the national stage, and I believe it's directly tied to the commercial and financial relationship that his family has with the Chinese government.
Between 2012 and 2015, China's aggression in the South China Seas was coming to an undeniable boiling point. President Obama appointed Joe Biden point man to the South China Seas, sending him to the Chinese to alleviate the tense situation.
I don't know why Obama kept doing this, because every time he'd make Biden the point man, America would lose. But he once again sent them there to try to get them to calm down on the islands, and to try to lower tariffs. Well, he brought Hunter Biden with him. At the time, nobody knew why.
It was December 4, 2013. The father and son duo flew over to China on an official mission via Air Force Two. Biden's answer to China's piratical aggression in the South China Seas was to remove America's Navy presence in the South China Seas altogether. The U.S. Navy, as advocated by Biden, was told to cease patrolling the South China Seas out of fear America might upset China. This was all China needed to plow forward with their illegal military presence. Worse, they continued to build islands in the South China Sea equipped with aggressive weapons systems. Joe Biden's visit in China ended in failure. Giuliani points to an odd timeline, and despite the failure of Biden's trip, Biden seemed happy upon leaving.
After 8 days, Joe was a miserable failure for the U.S. Actually, China further militarized the islands and raised tariffs. But he left smiling, strangely. Probably smiling because 8 days later, Hunter got a commitment of $1 billion to his pathetic private equity fund.
This is where things get dicey. Hunter Biden's private equity fund, Rosemont Seneca, strikes a deal. A $1 billion commitment from none other than the China Bank, one of the biggest state-owned banks controlled by the Chinese Communist. To the question of whether Hunter Biden profited off his father's power as vice president, the answer is painfully clear. Yet, the Bidens continue to deny it. The scale of their lie is as dangerous as it is insulting.
I've never seen a situation like this, Chanel. We're putting up as a major party candidate a man whose family and he has compromised themselves with what we would have to regard as one of our one or two biggest adversaries in the world.
Peter Schweizer's investigation into this matter highlights the abuse of power in the name of greed that took place in plain sight. In his latest film, Riding the Dragon, Schweitzer lays out the facts contradicting Biden's tale of innocence in China. Schweitzer tells One American News, the trouble with the Bidens and China boils down to this very simple but shocking timeline the Bidens demand we view as simply coincidental.
In December of 2013, Joe Biden flies on Air Force Two to Beijing for a series of meetings as Vice President of the United States. On the plane with him is his son, Hunter Biden. When they return from that trip, Hunter Biden and his firm announce a $1.5 billion private equity deal with the Chinese government. What's so shocking and troubling about this is that, number one, Hunter Biden has no background in private equity. There's no logical explanation as to why the Chinese would entrust his new firm, where he sat on the board of directors, with this amount of money.
It gets even shadier with Hunter's part in the creation of BHR, Bohai Harvest RST, in 2013. RST stands for Hunter Biden's recently established investment firm, Rosemont Seneca. Hunter starts making deals with the Chinese government.
What's troubling about this is what Hunter Biden's firm actually does. BHR, this private equity firm, he's on the board of directors, gets the money from the Chinese. They start making acquisitions of companies around the world. And all of these acquisitions are acquisitions that benefit the Chinese government, the Chinese military, and the Chinese national security state. So what I'd like to point out is we're all used to stories about a politician who gets his son or gets his nephew a corrupt deal and makes money. This is a far more important story than that. This is a story about a corrupt deal like that enriched the Bidens, but also severely damaged our position vis-a-vis China because the Biden family engaged in transactions that benefited our chief rival on the global stage.
A clear money trail between the drug addict son of the Vice President of the United States and the government of China. And not just the government of China. When Hunter Biden secures the $1.5 billion commitment from the Bank of China, this is all but a marriage between the Bidens and the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese military. Not only is the bank literally owned by the Chinese Communist Party, the bank's chairman, Tian Guoli, is the secretary of the Communist Party of China committee at the bank. No other firm in America or the world had the deal Hunter Biden's firm had with China. According to Schweitzer, Hunter, with his business partner Chris Hines, was able to beat out much more experienced, much larger firms and secure the first cross-border China-U.S. private equity investment firm. Hunter Biden and Chris Hines, as the sons of powerful individuals in the Obama administration, secured the deal of a lifetime.
And it just so happens that while they were doing that, Joe was negotiating with them and giving them everything they wanted plus more.
Within a few months of Hunter Biden's trip and securing of the $1.5 billion commitment from the Chinese government, China started becoming even more aggressive in the South China Sea, dredging 7 reefs in the South China Sea to create over 3,000 acres of land within 18 months since Joe Biden's visit. And despite telling the world it would not militarize these newly made islands, the Chinese government built advanced weapon systems throughout their newly created territory.
It's quite funny for Joe Biden to say now we need to get tough on China, when really over the last decade, so long as they've had these commercial ties, his position has been otherwise. And we actually recount that in the film over and over again. For him saying they're not a threat, we should welcome their rise, they're our friends, they're not bad people.
On whether Biden is sincere about his change of heart regarding China, Schweitzer says this is clearly an act.
When this story first broke last year on OANN and other news outlets based on our research, the Bidens realized they were in a bind. So they're now trying to make a statement or present a posture that he's tougher on China than he actually is.
And China, says Schweitzer, is playing right along in a strategic gambit.
I think as far as China's concerned, they will tolerate this. They've made clear openly in their Global Times publication that they prefer a Biden presidency to a Trump presidency. They are clearly cheering for Joe Biden. So they will certainly tolerate rhetoric that seems to presume that Joe Biden's going to be tougher on China, but everybody knows that his default position when it comes to Beijing is basically to be soft and to essentially appease them on any economic or political challenges that they represent.
That the Chinese Communist Party is rooting for a Joe Biden presidency should serve as no surprise to anyone who has tracked Biden's foreign policy track record, or to anyone who has followed the Hunter Biden-Rosemont Seneca money trail.
China's going to put a commitment of $500 million in that kind of private equity fund, when in fact what you got there is a vice president who you can buy and compromise. I'm telling you, China owns them.
But where it gets even more sinister is that Hunter Biden's partnership with the Chinese government was a form of greed that transcended patriotic allegiance. In other words, Hunter Biden, with the blessing of Obama and his father Joe Biden, was not only dealing with the Chinese Communist Party. Hunter brought the Chinese military straight to American shores. For many, the word treason comes to mind. Don't leave, we'll be right back. It is the year 2015. Joe Biden has been appointed point man for Ukraine. Shortly after, Hunter Biden, his son, suddenly starts collecting $50,000 a month to serve on the board of Ukraine's largest oil and gas company, Burisma, a company battered with corruption scandals and whose founder was then under investigation for money laundering and other fraud charges. But Burisma's shoddy reputation doesn't faze Joe or Hunter. Clearly, the Bidens, when faced with the prospect of money, are unashamed of associating themselves with companies of dubious repute. which explains why in 2015 Hunter Biden and his partners, including John Kerry's stepson, negotiated a deal with a Chinese military aviation company called AVIC. The deal? Hunter's investment firm partnered up with AVIC and bought Michigan-based dual-use technology manufacturer Henniges. Henniges made anti-vibration technology for cars, rockets, and military-related needs. The sale of a U.S. military technology company to a foreign military company like AVIC requires top-level authorization, which the son of the vice president and the son of the secretary of state seem to have no problem getting rubber stamped. The issue? 15 months before the Obama administration gave Hunter Biden and Heinz the green light to bring China's main military aircraft maker into Michigan, AVIC had been sanctioned by the Commerce Department 15 months earlier. AVIC has had a long history of stealing U.S. military aviation and drone technology. Just 1 year before Hunter partnered with AVIC, AVIC had been caught stealing technology related to America's F-35 stealth fighter jet and building their own J-31. None of this phases Hunter or his father or John Kerry or his son. In fact, so delighted were Hunter and his partners at Rosemont Seneca in the victory of vetting with the Chinese Communist Party, bringing in the Chinese military was an easy next step. Biden went 41% into Henniges, and AVIC swooped in, purchasing 51%.
And now we know, of course, that AVIC, this company, not only steals American secrets on a regular basis, anybody can go on the internet and find that, but also that this is a company that is seen as connected to the Chinese military and is on a list set up by the Trump administration of a company that needs to be monitored. That's the sort of thing you see over and over again.
And of course, China is delighted because why go to the effort and risk and expense of stealing technology when you can simply operate in the open? Schweitzer says the worst part of all this is that everyone at the top in the Biden-Obama administration seemed to know what was happening. They ignored these sanctions and the questionable alliances, and they turned a blind eye. Yet, Hunter feigns ignorance.
You can't have it both ways. You can't argue on the one hand, I belong on the board of Burisma, this corrupt Ukrainian energy company, because I'm a trained lawyer and I know what I'm doing. But then on the other hand, say that when these relationships blow up, I'm not smart enough to recognize what's going on. I think he knew what was going on. He didn't think he would get caught and it wouldn't be exposed, but it was. And now they're running for political cover and hoping that the American people won't become too aware of these commercial relationships.
And it's ridiculous, says Schweitzer, that Joe Biden himself says he didn't know what Hunter was up to.
Joe Biden has said he doesn't know anything about the commercial relationships or activities of his son while he was vice president. That's kind of laughable on its surface because any other time that the Biden family talks about Hunter, they talk about how close Joe and Hunter Biden are. And you take that trip to China, they spent, 18 hours on Air Force Two together flying to Asia. The notion that they never discussed it. We also know that on that trip to Beijing, China, a Chinese executive who was involved in Hunter Biden's activities admitted that he was introduced to the vice president on that trip by Hunter Biden. So I give zero credibility to Joe Biden's claim that he knew nothing about what his son was doing. We know that he knew about his activities in Burisma, and we know from this Chinese executive who is working with Hunter Biden that he was introduced to the vice president. It's very clear to me he knew what was going on.
Schweitzer argues Joe and Hunter Biden's conflicts of interest with China, America's adversary, is a case that must be investigated from the top, right and left politics aside.
The United States Senate is the logical place to investigate this. We know that the Oversight Committee has been looking at Hunter Biden's relationships in Ukraine, which I think is important. I don't know, but I hope that they are also looking at China, because I think they should. I think Ukraine is a dirty story, and it's a story that needs to be exposed. I think this one is far more troubling because the amounts of money are much larger. And again, Ukraine is a country that is vulnerable, that is looking for favors from the United States. China actually wants to supplant us. as the world's global superpower. And the fact that the Biden family is engaged in commercial activities with them that are aiding them in their efforts demands investigation, I think, by the United States Senate.
So what becomes of all this exposing? What becomes of this reporting, this investigating and unveiling of the Bidens' lucrative and devastating sellouts to China? The Biden campaign continues to feign ignorance, deflect, and gaslight. Will our agencies and our government take action? Is it not a civic duty to expose the conflicts of interest that the Biden family hold before potentially installing them into the highest office in the land? Hunter Biden is not likely to stop being Hunter Biden. The Biden family is not likely to suddenly heal themselves of their greed, all because Joe Biden potentially could be elected president. In fact, the next time Biden holds a position of power, it could arguably grow much worse. When we return, we look at what's next for the The name and face of Hunter Biden has become synonymous with drugs, scandal, crooked nepotism, bribery, and money laundering. Naturally, Hunter Biden has not been at the forefront of his father's campaign for the presidency. But his history of using his father's power at every opportunity could be cause for concern and interest for the American people. So where is Hunter now? Will he fade into the background of his father's life should Joe Biden take the Oval Office? Or will his addiction to greed be as unshakable as his addiction to drugs?
Whatever happened to Hunter? Where the hell is he?
Hunter Biden in October 2019 told reporters he would resign from the board of his China-based Bohai Harvest RST. As of April 2020, while his partners bailed and successfully removed themselves from the board, Hunter was still listed as a board member. His listed company address, a new home he had started renting in Beverly Hills. No one seems to be making a fuss over these details.
So nobody in Beijing is really going to talk about this. And the Biden position has been to lie about it in some cases or to pretend that it didn't happen. But the bottom line is, as far as I've seen in the research I've done over the last 12 years, looking at corruption on both sides of the aisle, I have never quite seen a case where a politician at this high level had a commercial tie with a chief American rival on the global stage, profited off of it, benefited that state, and then tried to pretend that it was not a problem. It's shocking to me, and I think the American people need to know about it to know what Joe Biden's posture is towards China and why.
Giuliani tells us Hunter Biden is neck deep still.
Right now, he has an equity interest in a Chinese company. Hasn't been sold yet. Right now, right this minute. I saw the documents that he has at least one.
And while the investment firm entanglements and selling military interests are concerning, the money trails run long and deep for the Bidens in China to this day.
That gets beyond that one transaction. There are at least 3 or 4 others. I know there's a $1 million payment for some kind of legal retainer. That looks very, very suspicious. I see other money flowing. I haven't had a chance to analyze it all yet. The State Department is the worst. They've been covering this up I gave them these documents over 1.5 years ago, and they just buried it. This whole idea that we're doing this now, right near the election, is absurd. Could have been done 1.5 years ago.
Giuliani says they've said it in the open and they say it behind their money vaults. The Chinese Communist Party is desperately hoping for a Biden presidency.
The Chinese want to get their investment back. They want to get Biden in office. They invested a lot of money in Biden. They're overjoyed that he's a candidate for president. They got everything they wanted out of him when he was vice president. They have him completely compromised. They know the deal. They know they were bribing Joe Biden. They could reveal that deal anytime they wanted. They got Joe Biden by the you-know-what. And don't tell me they don't have tapes and recordings also. Of course they do.
And this ultimately is the danger America simply cannot afford. Tune in every Saturday and Sunday for new editions of OAN Investigates from your team here at One American News. I'm Chanel Rian. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.